Welcome back to another episode of Fulfilled as a Mom. I am so excited to share this conversation with you. I had the opportunity to sit down with the one, the only Ginger Zee. She's the chief meteorologist at ABC. She is a mom, a scientist, an author, and she's speaking to us today all about honesty and vulnerability and the importance of addressing things like mental health and sleep and nutrition, and how all of those things affect the way that you show up in the world for everyone else in your life. So, without further ado, here she is, Ginger Zee. I'm Tracy Bingaman. I'm a full-time working mom of 5 who got sick, burned out, quit my job, and now I teach women how to mom smarter, not harder. The pressures of modern motherhood are intense. You're a busy working mom juggling all the balls and living in fear of dropping the exact wrong one. Here you'll find the tools you've been searching for to confidently prioritize your life and optimize your ability to rock all the hats that you choose to wear. I'll show you how to break through your limiting beliefs so you'll have more time and more money than you know what to do with. Because even in the busiest seasons of life, you can grow to master your money, own your time, and be the mom with all the margin. This is Fulfilled as a Mom. All right. So, Ginger, welcome to the show.
I am glad to be here.
So, tell us about yourself. What do you do and who are you?
I mean, this could take hours. It's a long-winded question, but I am a mother. I'm a wife. I'm a person who enjoys everything outdoors. I've been storm chasing since I was 19 years old, inspired by the movie Twister after falling in love with weather about 10 years before I saw that movie and not knowing what I wanted to do with it. And then kind of taking a turn and becoming a broadcast meteorologist and taking my talents and my education, which is just in meteorology, to communicating the science that I love most. And then throughout my entire career, I have changed my why quite a few times. Really moving from my passion for science to compassion for people and how it impacts, and then really into the mental health space, because I was always, as I was at every natural disaster from Katrina on, fighting my own storms at home in my mental health. And that is something that has now taken me into being an author and things that I never thought were possible. But that's the way life's supposed to go.
And you have been so vulnerable with sharing your story, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So, in your most recent book, you share about how, as you've grown, your perspective has changed and you've focused more on how things feel internally and less on how they look from the outside looking in. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and what that's looked like for you?
Yeah, it sounds like a strange thing coming from someone who's on television every day. But I think that's actually part of why I got to this place, because I like to think of, the food pyramid was such a nice way for us to see what should be our base, what should be the kind of higher, and what's the kind of the candy at the top. And I've done that with my life and changed that dramatically in the last decade, where that base of my health pyramid, not my nutritional pyramid, but my health pyramid, is mental health first. It's where I put my time, my money, my energy, all of it, because without that, the rest up to the top, including physical and all the other fun things, can't be there. And so I've put mental health, sleep, and nutrition as my base of my foundation. And then everything kind of builds on top. And that's where the biggest transitions have happened in my life. And that's why I like to share a lot of these tips, because I'm privileged. I was able to get the help I needed. I had access to great care. I had the financial ability to keep getting great care. And that's something that a lot of people don't have. So I almost feel like it's now my responsibility to utilize vulnerability and sharing, so I can give everybody at least what I've learned in all of that.
Yeah. So will you tell us just a little bit about that story and how you kind of came to feel like you did want to share that with the world?
Yeah, I like many people, I have a story, right? That is so far from perfect. And not just this job, any life. People have a hard time going back and looking at their own traumas, let alone sharing them. But I have found that there are so many parallels, and I watched it in natural disasters. When a tornado or a wildfire or a hurricane or a flood, doesn't matter what type, happens, I'm right there. And I've had this unique place where I get to study humans. And those natural disasters are traumas in life. But if we could take those and mirror the way that people process that trauma and the way that they grow through it and put that into our mental health, I think we would all be stronger. So my example is, say it's a tornado. The first thing that happens is you can't do what most of us do with mental health when a trauma happens is a lot of us say, well, that didn't happen. And we run away from it as fast as we can. With a tornado, your home is gone. You can't do that. I've watched people go from shock to sadness, to anger, to frustration, to disbelief, to questioning and confusion, to joy and gratitude, and then community helping each other within 7 days of all of these disasters. That's a really advanced, elite way to get through grief and trauma. So and this is not applicable to every single trauma in life, of course, but what I realized in watching all of this is, number one, it's visible. So everybody knows, and you can't avoid it. You can't pretend it didn't happen, because it did. Number two is you are forced, because your things are not there. Your family member maybe was hurt or killed. You are forced to deal with that in the moment. So yes, there's shock, but it's like, okay, it's here. Then you are usually not alone. And that community of the disaster comes together really quickly to help each other. It's like a cliche in a news story. But if we did that in mental health, if I share my tornado with you, whether that's, sexual assault or whatever it is, the community healing, the group therapy part of it is incredibly important to the healing of everyone, including myself. And so that's what I always think of when I talk about why I did this. In part, it was because I wanted to do what people do and have the grace that people have for Mother Nature, for myself and for others. And I think that only by being open with myself and with others was the way to get there. And then, of course, to be able to share the tools that I've learned with my privilege with other people as well.
Yeah. And I think that there's so much there where you're saying you can't ignore the damage that happens from this natural disaster. But when we walk through trauma, we're really good at just keep going, just keep going, just keep showing up, especially as women, especially as mothers.
Mm-hmm.
We keep showing up for everyone else every day before we're willing to say, hey, I need help, or
Mm-hmm.
I need to deal with this. So what advice do you have for the listener who's like, oh, yeah, my house did get blown over by a tornado, but I still haven't addressed it. And it's been days, weeks,
Right.
months, or even years since that happened.
Mm-hmm. And that happens in life. There are some traumas that we maybe even shouldn't address right away, because you have to have the shock wear off and you have to have those things. But what happens is they get compartmentalized, or they get, and then they're going to come out in other places. And if you don't process trauma, then it will stress your body forever. You can't delete it and get rid of it, but you can absolutely move through it. And you don't have to sit there and harp on it and go back and back and back and back, over and over to talk about it. But I do think that it helps you when you learn how to do the next trauma, because that's part of life. I always like to say that is like the atmosphere. You cannot just have a string of sunny days for the rest of your life. That's not how the atmosphere works. And that's not how our lives are going to work. And so it's not to be pessimistic, but it's to be very much in the vein of meditation, where we move through, we accept. And I've gotten on this big kick of saying, I am no longer on this pursuit of happiness. Happiness is such a strange thing to pursue, because that would be like pursuing sunshine every single day. We try, because there are places like San Diego, but even there, you're going to have clouds. And pursuing happiness, I'm pursuing peace with all of the emotions. Even this morning, I have felt pretty much all of them, I think. And once you shake hands with them in that moment, if my anger isn't based on something that I'm going to remember next week, I'm like, nice to see you, anger. Have a great morning. Next up, and happiness and joy are little pieces of that too. And you can take them in. You can spend a little more time shaking their hand or maybe give them a hug, but they're still not going to be there for the extended part of the day. And realizing that even within a day, you're going to go through all of these. It's the peace with all of them that's really what I'm pursuing.
And that you're cognizant of it, because I
Mm,
think oftentimes we're so busy doing all these things that we don't address or acknowledge that these different emotions are even happening. We're
yeah.
just kind of powering through and life is loud. So, what would you say to the person that's like, well, I'm halfway through the day and I couldn't even tell you what emotions have sort of come through? How can they tune back into what's happening in their own body?
So I think we do that a lot, and two things I think we can work on is kind of interviewing ourselves, like genuinely asking, how are you today? Or I wake up and I often, right when I wake up, will say, how are you feeling? Like, what is that feeling? Where does it come from? Is it exhaustion right now? Is it this? Being aware, and it even feels good to just have somebody, meaning myself, interested, right? And checking in. And then I think we can do that for other people, because once you start doing it, it's a practice, it's a habit. It's something that you build into your day, and you have to do that. You have to have several times where you check in. It's not a slowdown either. It's just I'm doing it as I'm getting into the shower. I'm doing it as I'm on my, drive somewhere. I'm doing it in places where it's not taking me away. I'm not in a full meditative 10-minute sit. It's that I just pause and check, like a little pulse check, right? And that does make a huge difference, I have found, at least in my day, to kind of, it sounds strange, but everybody talks to themselves, right? But now interview yourself and get a little bit of a back and forth going, so that somebody's got to check on you.
You know what the world needs? A more confident version of you. The you that you see in the mirror every day, and honestly, maybe the you that you're a little bit hesitant to share with the rest of the world. The world needs you to show up authentically as you are, using your unique strengths and abilities to make the world a better place. If you are looking to step into your power and to feel better about the person that you see staring back at you in the mirror, I'm inviting you to join us on our journey to a more confident you. I'm offering a 5-day confidence challenge. It's me sending you love notes of encouragement and action steps that you can take today to be more confident tomorrow. You can check it out following the link in the show notes, or go to tracybingaman.com/challenge. I can't wait to have you join us. Yeah, and you have control of whether or not that happens, especially if you're doing it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to dive into a little bit labels. You talk about this in the book, how we label ourselves, how society labels us based on who
Mm-hmm.
we are, what we look like, what we do for work. Do we have
Mm-hmm.
kids? Where do we live? And kind of how do we show up day to day? So talk to me about your journey with labels, how that's changed, and how you've kind of taken back control over what labels you're willing to accept.
It's so human to label, right? As a mother, I've been so cognizant of this because I wrote a whole chapter about it in my book, but also just because I know the negative things that labels can do. And there are also, of course, positive things that labels can do for us. But I just think being aware of what we're doing with them and what they mean or what they don't mean is important. So I'll use as an example, I was told in 7th grade, after I got a B on a paper, I was in a new school and I was not a B student. Okay. B, because there's a label. I was not a B student and I couldn't possibly get a B. So I went up to this teacher and I said, I really can't have this happen. So like, what can I do so this never happens again? And maybe can I remedy what went on here? And she was like, well, no, you can't. But maybe writing isn't your thing. I interpreted that as, you're a bad writer. Now, math and science, I never had that experience. I didn't have to work as hard. It was easy. It was something that came. I thought, well, that's what I am. I do math and science because that's a label. And then I kind of perpetuated those labels all the way up through when I was pregnant with my son. And I had said, man, even though I wrote scripts and things, it was different. It wasn't like writing. And I used to love writing. If I remember the first 12, 13 years of my life, well, okay, let's say 6, because I wasn't writing at age 2. I wasn't a prodigy by any means. I really loved it. And I remember it feeling like a creative expression of me. And that one comment or label I took on myself and then just kept saying, I'm a bad writer. I'm a bad writer. I'm a bad writer. That stuck. And until I was pregnant with my son and I looked around and I couldn't find a baby book about weather that was very good. And I thought I could write a baby book. Like I can do that. And I went to a publisher and I told them about my idea for this character, helicity, my favorite variable in tornado forecasting. And they said, that's not really a baby book. That's like more of a chapter book for tweens. And why don't you go write that? And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm not a writer. And then they said, okay, why don't you try? And I went and wrote a couple chapters, brought it back, and they were like, this is great. How about we do a trilogy? I was like, excuse me? And then, through the process of writing those books, I started talking about my real life. And she said, why don't you write that? That's a book about your life. And then I was on the New York Times bestseller list 2 times in a row. The non-writer is now an author. And how wild that label, and I'm not saying that it absolutely ruined my life that I did this. I think I'm doing fine. But I do think that they're very powerful. And I think that if you really do enjoy something, why are we stopping? Granted, if you're a bad singer, then it wouldn't be great probably for American Idol. They love it because it always gives them those first couple of episodes. So I'm not saying like just blow through every single thing and everybody's glorious at everything. But that, and then as a parent, I watch. And it's so hard because we're giving them their identity before they're 7 years old. And my kids are in that sweet spot right now. So I try really hard not to say the obvious. I would never say it in front of him. But my older one is sensitive. That's just how he came out. But if I say he's the sensitive one and the younger one's the tougher one, that will carry with them for the rest of their life. That's not who they're going to be forever. That's not going to form every experience, but it may be in their head. And so I think there's great power, both positive and negative, in labels.
Yeah, for sure. And thinking those things that you're telling yourself that either you're
Yes.
great at or only good at, and the
Yes.
things that you're not so good at.
The limiting
Check
ones, and the
those.
absolute ones those just have no place, I don't think. And I wish, and I'm in the wrong business for this because I do think, and most businesses, they don't want complex, like you're one thing. When we put a chyron, that lower third up, it just has a title. It only has room for a couple of words. That's all somebody can be. And we, of course, we are more than our jobs, but societally, it's the first thing we ask each other. It's the first, instead of, what have you given to the world today? Or like, when's the last time you volunteered? Like, how is that not our first question? But it starts when they're 5 and we ask them what they want to be when they grow up. And then we don't mean, something more holistic. We mean, what job do you want to have?
Sure. Yeah. Not how do you want to show up in the world.
That's
or
right.
who do you
Or
want
who
to
would you like to help?
serve?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I really want to thank you for your transparency and your honesty in the book. And you share a little bit in the introduction about how you were, even at the last minute, right before it was published, kind of freaking out that you were like, oh no, what did I do that I wrote this? And it's so personal. So, and yet, despite that, you still published it and showed up as your authentic self. So tell us a little bit about that. And what do you have to say to the listener who is struggling to show up as their authentic self in this world that has lots to say about it?
I would say to anybody struggling with that, and I think for me, I can go back to that moment before it was published. I had been a people pleaser my whole life. I had been on the trying to get to the summit of perfection without realizing how impossible that was. Even though I could say, oh, perfection isn't possible, I was still going to try. So for me to broadcast widely how imperfect I was, it was really scary that first time. And then I saw the response. And I think that just getting over that little cliff of imperfection instead of going to the peak of perfection was one of the more powerful and healing parts of my journey so far. And I would encourage everyone to do it with at least one person. I don't think everybody has to sit down and write an entire memoir letting out all the skeletons in their closet. I don't know if that's even good for people, but I would say that it would be important to write it down for yourself so that you can have control and understanding and honesty in your own narrative. And then one more layer would be to share it with somebody, because then you are starting your community of healing, and you have a teammate in this, and it could be someone close to you. It could be someone that's not. Sometimes it's easier to have someone that's not. And I think that that's something to be open to as well. I find writing these books and sharing them with the world was easier with the strangers because I don't have this intimacy or connection that I do with my family. It was harder to share with my family or with really close friends. Their reactions were harder. So I think if I look back, I was worried about the wrong group, and now I feel like I'm also in a safe place. I've said it all. It feels so light. It doesn't mean that it's going to be light forever. I know there will be other traumas, and I don't need to write a book about every single one. But I have learned so much in this process of sharing, and I really highly encourage people to do it because I do think it's the most important first step.
Are you looking for a way to entertain your little one that does not involve the use of screens? If you're a mom of kids between the ages of 3 and 9, then you will definitely want to check out Goop Tales. It's a podcast with over 1 million downloads, 100 episodes, and it's hands down the best kid storytelling podcast that you've probably never heard of. The Goops are these adorable little creatures with naughty character traits that gets them into trouble, and it sends them straight out of the Goop world and into adventures all around the world. Your kids will learn about other countries and cultures while also sparking important conversations about character traits. I just finished listening to episode 109 with my kids during dinner cleanup. And in it, this character Negotiati goes to this cool market and they loved it. Visit gooptales.com to listen or look them up anywhere you get your podcasts. And I think there's something to be said for that. First, I'm going to come to terms with it myself and write it down and take ownership of it. And then when you share it with one person, your community, someone that you know or don't know, you're kind of bringing it out of the darkness and saying, hey, I'm willing to share this. And there's some healing that happens in that, bringing it out into the light and saying, I'm no longer hiding this. And by not hiding it, I'm owning it in a way that's different than I have in the past.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, I said secrets are my secret weapons now. Because they allow me to have a community, and it allows me to have, from strangers to my own family, it forced me to make people understand more about me that was so imperfect. And now I think that it's expected. Like, of course she's imperfect. It really does lower in the best way, because none of us should have that expectation of ourselves or from others or of others. And that's something that the emotional regulation surrounding that I've done a ton of work on. And that's something that's fascinating to watch, because my 6-year-old is working on that. And we as adults often haven't gotten there. And so I'm like, wow, we're at kindergarten level of emotional regulation. And many of us weren't given the skills or the education to be able to learn how to do that. And so how I try to look at the positive part there is how great I get a chance to inform him and educate him and work at the same time as him on this very thing that will make life hopefully just a little more peaceful. Not easy, not joyful, peaceful.
Yeah. I think that so much of this generation of parents, we're saying, hey, we're learning alongside our kids. We're growing up with them. Whereas when we were kids, our parents knew everything. They were like in a totally different inhuman category.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to be part of this group of moms who are saying, my kid's learning how to emotionally regulate themselves. Me too.
Me too.
My kid's learning what they're passionate about. Me too.
And how
I
important it
didn't
is
know.
to model that and to be transparent about that. Like, listen, mommy doesn't know how to do this quite yet either. We're learning together. That's way more fun for them. And it will be a way more open relationship for them to know that I've done things wrong. That modeling of imperfection is something that is one of the biggest parenting, I don't know, the newest, bestest part of parenting, I think. And it wasn't that my parents were perfect, obviously, but I thought they were for so long that when I saw the crack, it was devastating. Whereas if they know from the moment they're cognizant that you're imperfect, then it's like, oh, that's mom, that's part of her. And that's what people will ask me, like, are you worried about your boys and how do you treat it right now? And, with depressive moments or things, I had one a couple summers ago where I just had a funky couple of days and couldn't get out of it. And I've done so much work to be as healthy as I can around those, but I was just bawling on the deck, couldn't get out of that feeling. And I thought I was away from my kids, but my son saw me and he came over and he was like, "What's wrong, mommy?" And like right in that moment, instead of saying, "Oh, nothing," and wiping away tears, I kept crying and said, "Mommy doesn't feel well today. I'm sick." Because I am, right? And some days I'll be sicker and some days I won't be sick at all. And there's people who can help me and you're going to be part of my team eventually. I want him to know that. And if we start reframing what the mental health things that you can't always see are called, it doesn't mean someone's broken. It means that at that moment they have a sprained brain or a sprain, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't pick them up. And I always think this is wild too. If we saw someone with a shattered leg on the side of the road, we pick them up and bring them to the hospital. When someone has that with a mental health break or breakdown or anything, we don't know what to do. We all freeze and we're like, Plus, there's not a lot of clear places for people to go. And that's why I still think we need people to be societally, not just our family, our friends, our team, everybody, to pick people up and say, "I'm going to hold your hand and help you over there." Because guess who can't get themselves there? The person with the shattered brain. Right? They can't get themselves at that moment, just like the person with a shattered leg isn't going to be walking themselves to the hospital. So I want my kids to grow up at a very, at this age where that's about as appropriate as it is. And then I want them to know those things. I want them to know that life hasn't been perfect, but there are a lot of wonderful moments that come along with it too.
Absolutely. That is so powerful. And it should just remind us to be on the lookout for people who need us to say, "Hey, how can I help you? I'm here to help you for, getting through this time." That's so important. Well, I think this is going to be so powerful for our listeners. And I know that they're saying, "Hey, where can I find more of Ginger? Where can they find your book? And where can they connect with you online?"
Yeah, the easiest to get everything is ginger-zee.com. That's my website. It has all the book stuff on it, and then also all my social. But I'm on all of them, and I try to reply to everybody that I possibly can, and that's where I've created some of the best connections. And this, I was not planning on having this big mental health community in my life, but now do. And I would love for anybody listening to be a part of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for doing it 5 minutes early.
I'm doing a victory dance right now because you did it. You took the time to tune in, to reach for a better life, and to take care of you. Did our time together go by way too fast for anyone else? Head to fulfilledasamom.com for show notes and all the discount codes from today's show. You now have the tools and knowledge to change your life. Go blaze your trail, take that step, make the shift, and do the work to create fulfillment in your life today.